Thank you, CSA, for the opportunity to present at this webinar, the CSA Cloud Bytes series. Today's topic is on defending against the cloud adversary, detection and response in the cloud. A quick introduction into my background. Hi, I'm Suril Desai. I'm VP of Detection Engineering at Acalvio Technologies. I have extensive domain experience in cybersecurity and in cyber deception. So we'll discuss the agenda for today's the session. The agenda is primarily about what makes cloud threats different. Why does cloud security need detection and response? We'll discuss the role of honey tokens for cloud detection and response, or CDR. Then we'll talk about how to protect multi-cloud workloads through CDR. And we'll discuss a set of detection scenarios. Many of you would be familiar with the term living off the land attacks. In cloud environments, attacks have become very fast and stealthy and sophisticated. The new terminology is being referred to as living off the cloud attacks. These are attacks where there is very little to no malware used, and the attacker is able to complete their mission within just a few minutes from the point of initial entry. Cloud exploits have increased by over 75% in the last 12 months. The cloud conscious adversary is a term that you might be familiar with. The cloud conscious adversary refers to the adversary that is exploiting unique characteristics of the cloud environment. So these are adversaries that are aware that they are performing offensive actions in the cloud, and they are also aware of the specific capabilities that cloud environments provide. These adversaries leverage offensive tooling, which is specifically designed for exploiting cloud workloads. And one main advantage that cloud provides for an attacker is that unlike on-premise environments that are different for each enterprise, there is a significant amount of consistency in the cloud. And so the adversary can perfect an adversarial playbook and then repeat it multiple times as they compromise every enterprise that is hosted in the cloud. One of the common characteristics that adversaries are targeting is the availability of the control plane. So adversaries are doing dedicated offensive actions that is targeting the control plane in the cloud and using it to elevate privileges and then gain access to critical systems. Identities are the top attack vector in the cloud. So adversaries leverage identities to then gain access to the resources. In a cloud environment, the identities are of many different types. There is identity and access management system, which includes user accounts, service accounts. These are being targeted by threat actors. There are also credentials of various formats, access keys and secrets. These identities are being targeted by threat actors, and they provide pathways for lateral movement. Attackers have readily available offensive tools which are extracting credentials specifically for cloud environments. An example of that tool is Trufflehog, which has the ability to extract credentials from multiple cloud workloads and provide it to the threat actor. Let's discuss the goal of the adversary in a cloud environment. One of the primary goals of an attacker in the cloud is to gain access to a critical system. In order to get there, the attacker is typically looking to elevate privileges. So the privilege elevation enables the attacker to get access to critical resources, sensitive data, and they can, in order to do that, exploit misconfigurations in cloud services. Identity and access management, or IAM, is the most commonly attacked service in the cloud for escalation of privileges. The attacker has many different techniques to elevate privileges. They can leverage multiple actions and exploits against these actions to be able to gain access to escalated privileges and then take those privileges to then further perform lateral movement and impact activity in a cloud environment. Let's look at a particular attack type. For example, one of the popular threat actors is known as scattered spider. So you would be familiar with scattered spider. They've had a lot of top breaches that they've been involved with, including, for example, the Alfie ransomware that compromised large enterprises in 2024 has been then attributed to this threat actor group. So Scattered Spider has been performing malicious activity over the last few years, traditionally started off by compromising on-premise IT environments. This threat actor group has increasingly now pivoted towards exploiting cloud workloads. And so in this particular case, what Scattered Spider group does is prior to being able to detonate the ransomware, they gain access to the target environment, in this case, a cloud workload. They get access to credentials, they elevate privileges, they establish persistence, and then they download and detonate the malware. In this case, it could be a ransomware. So for a defender, being able to detect the threat prior to the ransomware detonation is very important when you're trying to defend against stealthy and prolific threat actors such as Scattered Spider. So now that we've looked at the attack side of the cloud environment, let's look at the defender's view and analyze the cloud security from a defender's perspective. So the cloud security landscape has been focused on what is called as CNAPP, or Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. In this particular type of a comprehensive category, what CNAPP includes is ability to do prevention-based controls. These are done through solutions like cloud security posture management. They perform pre-attack visibility or scanning of a cloud workload. They identify misconfigurations in the cloud, and they identify over permissions, credentials that can be exploited by the threat actor. And then it also includes the ability to perform runtime detection of threats, which is effectively about runtime analysis and workload protection. That category is known as cloud detection and response, which is the primary focus for today's discussion. Cloud detection and response and runtime security is geared towards security operations on the enterprise side. Many of the other prevention solutions are geared towards DevOps teams. So there's a shift from you need to cater to multiple type of personas on the customer side, including DevOps and SecOps, with different tailored solutions for each of these. Cloud security posture management has been heavily adopted by organizations. While this is a necessary solution, it is not sufficient in itself. So what CSPM solutions do is they provide primarily visibility for misconfigurations in the cloud. Prevention-based controls are always necessary, but it is not practical to being able to eliminate the attack surface altogether. That is a challenging and not a practical proposition. One of the many reasons for that is that the attack surface is changing very rapidly. There are over 40 new services and 1,600 new actions that have been added to cloud environments each year for the last 6 years. This is a very rapid rate of growth, and making changes to prevent such a expanding attack surface is very difficult for defense teams. In addition, any configuration changes can impact production workloads, and it can also impact availability of the application. Ultimately, the objective of a cloud environment is to ensure high availability, provide redundancy, make sure that the business can continue. So security teams always have the challenge of making sure that any changes related to mitigation do not impact the business. And so that trade-off needs to be considered. And as a result, it is very hard to make prevention changes to remove the entire attack surface. Organizations will always have a significant residual attack surface even after making the configuration changes that they are able to make from the CSPM findings. In addition, CSPM solutions can also miss subtle policy-related issues. So, for example, there are policies in the cloud environment that control access to the workload. Some of these policies can be case sensitive. And so now if the administrator as a human oversight landed up not realizing that that policy was case sensitive, in this example, the resource related policy has a case sensitive nature and the admin has set it as a lowercase word admin. If the attacker gets access to this, the attacker can use admin with an uppercase A and then gain access to the targeted resource, and the CSPM solution would not have identified that. So as a result, there is significant amount of gap that CSPM solutions are unable to address. So now let's discuss what is actually cloud detection and response. So cloud detection and response, the definition of this based on the analysis from Forrester Group is effectively a category of cyber defense which is focused around detecting and responding to threats specifically in cloud environments. So this includes the detection surface in the control plane in the cloud, in the data plane, and the management plane. And so effectively, the idea is to provide tooling that is specifically geared towards threat detection in the cloud, and that is able to detect threats that go beyond lift and shift workloads and includes detection for cloud native workload threats as well. And the whole objective is to provide high quality detection and then enable investigation and response actions. So cloud detection and response has identify capabilities for visibility, has the detection capabilities and the response capabilities to be able to stop the threat and protect the enterprise from cloud workload. So now if we look at the cloud detection and response as a category, the cloud service providers, which is the CSPs, so for example, AWS or Azure, many of these do provide their own native tooling for threat detection, but typically the idea is that they are not providing a comprehensive CDR offering. And the main reason for that is each CSP is primarily focused around providing detection capabilities for their own platform. However, organizations are actively adopting multi-cloud workloads. Over 90% of the organizations are using multi-cloud workloads. And so as a result, the cybersecurity team and the threat defense team needs specific solutions and tooling that is focused around detecting threats targeting these multi-cloud workloads. Threat detection in the cloud is quite challenging for cyber defense. There are many unique characteristics of cloud environments that make the threat detection challenging. Examples of this include the dynamic and ephemeral workloads. Typically, for example, cloud workloads have a significant usage of ephemeral workloads like containers orchestrated in a Kubernetes environment as an example. The dynamic nature of these workloads make detection challenging because the workload might come and go at will. And now from a anomaly or a baselining based detection approach, you can't effectively create a baseline because there is no predictable pattern for the usage of that workload. So since the workload patterns are not a priori predictable, it's hard to be able to find anything anomalous. And so that makes detection challenging, especially when you try to use techniques such as anomaly detection. The other challenges which are unique to cloud is the volume and the variety of the log sources. So cloud environments have multiple sources of logs. So for example, there are control plane logs. Just to give one example, in the case of AWS, it would be CloudTrail. And so in addition to that log, there are several other logs. For example, individual services in the cloud have their own logs. So the S3 bucket in an AWS environment has its own native log. And so now if you look at detection based on log analytics, then one has to be able to combine all the logs from these various sources and then be able to process them and identify malicious activity. It becomes very challenging when the variety of sources is very high, like it is in the cloud. And also the volume of log is another important consideration. Typically, cloud environments have active amount of logging being performed. So every action does result in a log entry. And so the log volume quickly becomes very high with easily terabytes of logs being generated in short windows of time. Now, the defender who's performing log analytics has to be able to process this significant log volume and identify malicious activity from within the log. So that makes it hard to address. The number of services, ever increasing services, continuously cloud platforms add new services as part of expansion of the workload. Now, threat actors have to create dedicated tooling and rules for detecting threats that target these new services. Makes it very hard. So overall, detection engineering in the cloud is very, very challenging. There are lots of complex interrelationships between objects, and attackers are exploiting these gaps, making cybersecurity teams' job highly difficult. So now, from a defender's perspective, the objective is to advance the state of cloud security. So for that objective, an excellent defense approach that can be considered is what is known as honey tokens. So honey tokens, by deploying honey tokens in a cloud environment, the defender gets the ability to detect a wide variety of threats. Honey tokens can be of many different types. They can be account honey tokens. So for example, deceptive identity and access management users, service principals, roles. These can be added to the cloud IAM stores. In addition to that, there are other type of honey tokens that can be also leveraged. Workload honey tokens, which are effectively deceptive access keys and secrets. These are derived from the account honey tokens and they're added to cloud workloads, for example, into instance metadata, into secrets manager, into environment variables. And each of these honey tokens can then be deployed into the respective cloud platforms. So the benefit of honey tokens is being able to provide early detection of threats. So the attacker gets initial access to the cloud environment. And as we saw earlier in the discussion, the attacker will attempt to pivot towards a critical resource in the cloud. And by the defender can set traps in strategic locations. Examples of these traps would be account honey tokens in identity and access management stores, workload honey tokens deployed across cloud workloads. These traps can enable the defense to detect the threat at a very early stage of the attack lifecycle. And the honey tokens are not used in existing workflows. Any usage of the honey tokens or the deceptions is an immediate indicator of malicious activity. And if you look at it from a MITRE attack framework perspective, the attacker has several tactics that are employed as part of the early stages of the offensive actions. So, for example, being able to perform discovery, gain access to credentials, elevate privileges, perform defense evasion, and then lateral movement. By setting traps for each of these tactics, the defender can detect the attack right at that stage itself before it actually matures and then propagates in the environment. So that way you can actually detect the threat and stop the attack from propagation. One other important benefit of honey tokens is the precision in the detection. So traditional security controls are based on detection rules, which are looking for very specific attack techniques or also looking for anomalous activity. In the case of modern adversaries, especially for adversaries that are employing living of the cloud attacks, there is very little use of malware, which makes the detection based on specific tools very challenging. And also, the attackers are leveraging existing infrastructure in the cloud, which makes the detection based on logs very difficult to find because all the malicious activity looks legitimate and looks normal. In the case of honey tokens involve strategic traps for the adversary. And the main benefit of that is that the detection approach is agnostic to the attacker tooling or the nature of the attacker actions. So it provides capability to detect threats independent of the specific TTP being used by the threat actor. A recent guidance from the NSA and the Five Eyes Security Alliance is a great attestation to the benefits of honey tokens. So for example, if as you see the quote here, effectively talks about the challenges of detection engineering in being able to identify malicious activity from legitimate activity when you use traditional forms of detection, and then talks about why honey tokens and deception technology is an effective technique to detect compromises because it is not based on looking at a specific attacker technique, and instead it's based on setting a trap for the goal of the attacker and then identifying the attacker. For enterprises that have multi-cloud workloads, honey tokens can be deployed across each of the cloud environments. And so the idea is to being able to provide comprehensive coverage so organizations can deploy across lift and shift and cloud native workloads, across containerized and Kubernetes workloads. And the whole objective of this is to extend beyond the infrastructure and also include workloads such as applications and data. And that way, the defender gets coverage for multi-cloud environments, and you can deploy honey tokens across the identity as well as the workloads parts of the multi-cloud environment. Now let's look at an attack scenario and see how honey tokens serve defenders and provide benefits from a real world attack perspective. So here is an attacker who has gained access to an environment in the cloud. And so the attacker has compromised a user, and the attempt is to be able to elevate the privileges. In order to do that, the attacker performs enumeration looking for an account that has a specific policy attached, and that policy has an action that allows the attacker to be able to create a policy version. This particular permission grants the attacker the ability to elevate privileges because now the attacker can create a new policy version, and in that policy version, they can set a definition to allow access to all the resources in the cloud. Once they gain access to that type of a policy version and they create it, they can now attach it to that particular user or the role and then assume that role. And now they are able to gain privilege elevation. They can become admin from the original user account that they were on. So now let's look at this type of attack and see what honey tokens can do in this context. So the defender can set a deliberate trap for the attacker, and that trap can be a honey token account, which could be a user or it could be a service account. It could be even a role, and that role has the deliberate privilege granted to being able to provide the ability to create the policy version. Now, when the attacker is performing enumeration, if they find such a role available, the attacker does not know that it's a deceptive role. And so the attacker finds it attractive. They attempt to assume it. And the moment they attempt to do that, the defender will get an alert. So, right at that point of the attack life cycle, the defender can know that there is an attacker and it can stop the attacker at that stage itself. Let's look at a scenario about how workload honey tokens can help the defender. So here is an end-to-end attack scenario. So the attacker finds an SSH key on a publicly exposed S3 bucket. The attacker logs into the SSH server via default accounts using the SSH key. They then scan the host and they look for AWS credentials, which are then stored in local environments or configuration files. These credentials provide the attacker the ability to then leverage the permissions associated with the credentials to then perform further lateral movement, run discovery, elevate privileges, and then establish persistence in the AWS environment. This type of an attack is a very typical attack sequence being used by many, many different APT groups. In this case, let's look at what deception technology and honey tokens can do to help the defense. So defenders can create a set of deceptions, which are workload honey tokens, and deploy this onto real assets in the environment. So for example, a deceptive set of credentials deployed on actual EC2 instances can then be done by the defender. So now the attacker gets into the same exploit sequence. They find the SSH key, they land on the EC2 instance, and they're looking for credentials on the instance. As part of the attacker's reconnaissance output, they will see credentials. These credentials are actually deceptive credentials or workload honey tokens. The attacker does not know that these are deceptions. So they attempt to use those credentials to being able to perform a login into an AWS environment. The moment they attempt that type of a login, the defender gets an alert. So now the attacker is stopped right at that stage itself, and the attack sequence does not progress. So that's how workload honey tokens provide an important benefit. And the same approach can be used to protect various types of workloads in a cloud environment and also in multi-cloud environments across different cloud providers. We have discussed the benefits of honey tokens. For organizations and administrators, if they attempt to create honey tokens manually, it is fairly challenging. Even though the concept and the approach is well known, proven, and has a lot of cybersecurity benefits, it gets hard to do this manually by hand. And the main reason for that is that the administrator needs to make several decisions when they attempt a manual creation. For example, how many honey tokens should the administrator create? Should it be like a few identity IAM accounts? Should it be a multiple? Should they create a user or should they create a role? Those type of decisions the administrator needs to make. They then also need to figure out what are the permissions that they should grant to these honey tokens. How do you make it attractive to the attacker? In the case of the cloud environment, as we all know, there are so many different permissions and policies that are available. The administrator now has to make a set of assessments on figuring out which of these policies would make it attractive for the attacker. This requires a lot of domain knowledge of cyber deception, of the threat surface in the cloud, makes it very challenging for the administrator to do this manually. So effectively, now if you look at the strategy for a cyber defense, one of the main recommendations and learnings that we would like to share with the community is that defenders should apply an attacker's mindset for an effective strategy of honey tokens. So honey tokens need to be made realistic so that they look relevant for the attacker. They should also appear enticing for the adversary to exploit. This is very important because ultimately there are always practical constraints around how many honey tokens can be deployed in an environment. And so now if you're going to place a few honey tokens, then being able to get efficacy through those few honey tokens requires each honey token to be created in a very carefully crafted manner. So the honey token needs to have specific characteristics that make it enticing for the attacker to exploit it. The type, the placement, the refresh of the honey tokens needs a strategy. So the defender needs to make a set of assessments on how many do you put, where do you put them, how do you make it effective for the getting comprehensive coverage. In order to do that, there are several technologies that can be of significant benefit. The advances of AI have many benefits for being able to get a cybersecurity strategy for honey token placement, honey token design, and the type and the refresh frequency of honey tokens. So by combining domain knowledge of cyber deception with the power of AI and machine learning, this provides a very elegant combination for the defender to being able to create an effective strategy for deceptions. One other important aspect from a cyber defense strategy is that any solution for honey tokens needs to have fitment into the cloud infrastructure and the existing security stack that the enterprise is using. So for example, multi-cloud workload support is highly essential. As we discussed, organizations are using multi-clouds in over 90% of the cases. So any honey tokens strategy needs to be able to cover the multiple clouds that organizations are using. Interoperability with prevention controls is very important. As a detection layer, it's very important to have a symbiotic and a complementary integration with prevention-based security. So CSPM interoperability with honey tokens and cloud detection and response is integral to being able to get a comprehensive solution. SIM and SOAR platform integrations are also very important so that the SOC team, which is the primary user of such a solution, would get a single pane of glass for being able to perform threat investigation as well as response actions based on the detections. So in summary, we'll discuss the defense in depth approach for multi-cloud security. So what we have looked at today is that organizations need a combination of prevention with detection. That's the approach to get comprehensive security. It's a layered security strategy where each layer has its own role to play, and you combine multiple layers which are carefully chosen so that you can get comprehensive coverage and avoid any detection gaps. So threat detection in the cloud needs a focused strategy. Traditional detection approaches have significant challenges, especially because of the unique characteristics of cloud workloads and the volume of the logs. Honey tokens provide a highly effective and proven approach for cloud detection and response. So organizations should consider a combination of prevention security, such as Cloud Security Posture Management or CSPM, and then combine that with cloud detection and response based on honey tokens, CDR, and that way you can get defense in depth for the prevention and detect capabilities, and then overlay that with the response capabilities so that that way there is the ability to defend against a wide variety of threat actors. Thank you for your time and interest, and thank you to CSA.